What's up guys, welcome to the Sunday sessions. My name's Rob, Aylesbury Modern Combat Karate, and these are the informal, unscripted videos where I just talk about specific subjects related to karate or the martial arts in a wider sense. And for the karate videos I discuss where I think we're doing well, where I think we're not doing so well, things that we can build on that we're doing well, things that I think we should scrap that are absolute trash. So in today's video, I'm going to be discussing sparring. I'm going to be discussing things that I think that karate does really poorly with sparring. I'm going to be discussing how we do it, and I'm going to be discussing elements that we can take from other places to build into our sparring. So, first of all, when it comes to sparring, people very often just think of the competition style sparring and not necessarily just WKF style karate sparring, but they'll think about kickboxing or boxing sparring and just about the sport oriented stuff. So when I talk about sparring, I'm also talking about things like our get up drills, things like our escape drills, our disorientation drills, all of that kind of thing. So I suppose when I say sparring, I'm more talking about live practice, but I'll use the term sparring because more people will be familiar with it, and also because the term sparring includes some elements in kind of traditional karate that the term live sparring wouldn't apply to because they're not done live, and that's what I'm going to discuss first. So the first thing I'm going to discuss is awful things in traditional karate that need scrapping yesterday. So I'm not the first person to comment on these by any means. They've been talked about before, but the first thing that I really think needs scrapping in traditional karate is step kumite. Now, I want to make it clear that I'm not against pre-arranged drills. So in our club, we use motor boost drills as pre-arranged partner drills. I'm a huge fan of Judo's Goshin Nujutsu Kata. I think they're a really good set of pre-arranged partner drills. For historical interest purpose, we actually do the EI drills from Kyohan, from Karate Do Kyohan. So those are the kneeling drills that are done as kind of self-defense from a seated position, obviously relevant to 1920s Japan more than they are today, but they're a really interesting set, and I'm quite clear with people that this is not practical stuff. This is stuff that's in there because it's it's interesting, it's got historical interest, it's got just kind of combative interest. It's really interesting to think about these things through and think how they might have been applied, but they're also fun. It's something a little bit quirky. It keeps things fresh. They work really nice as like groundwork warm-ups and grappling warm-ups and things. So but I'm quite clear with people that this is not a practical element of our training. This is something we do for these other reasons that are all in my opinion quite valid reasons, but they are different reasons to why we do the other things that we do. So the problem arises when you look at 1 and 3 step sparring, or even the kind of semi-free sparring that a lot of clubs have, and this is where it's put forward as combatively useful for something other than WKF style point sparring, and it's not made clear to people that actually this isn't something that's going to be beneficial to you outside of the actual act of doing these things. When we do the EI drills, when we do the kneeling drills, it's clear that when we do them, they're not going to be of any benefit to you outside of being able to perform the EI drills better. I just enjoy them, so I've included them because as I said, I think they're fun, I think they're interesting. It's good to have stuff that's different in there. Not everything you have has to be practical. You just have to be clear about the purpose. But a lot of traditional clubs will look at the 1 and 3 and some places even do 5 step sparring, and they'll go, no, this is to develop you practically into a fighter, and that's just dishonest, it's disingenuous, and it's untrue. It's not something that's going to happen. So that is something that I think we absolutely need to bin. It's something that comes from that traditional, and when I say traditional, I mean 1930s Japanese onwards karate, that we just need to scrap. It doesn't work for us. It's something that comes from the formalised drills in kendo and judo, which are much better. So if you look at very basic judo instruction, you'll have kumikata, so you'll have that lapel and sleeve grip. You'll do 1 step, 2 step, 3 step throw on the 3rd step. So it's a really good way when learning throws to learn when during an opponent's movement you need to throw them. And it's a good way at a slow speed to get your timing down, so that you can gradually increase it, gradually increase the speed, gradually increase the power, and you'll develop the ability to throw people at the right time. Unfortunately, because of how prescriptive and how formalised karate's equivalent is, they have no use, they have no purpose. So that's something that I think we need to scrap entirely. The next thing I want to talk about is the sport style sparring. Now, sport style sparring is something that we do in our club, but we don't do WKF style kind of in and out, nice and quick point, score a point, you're done, reset, that kind of sport style sparring. The sport style sparring that we do bears a much greater similarity to what you perhaps see kickboxers or MMA fighters doing. So the reason we do this is for a couple of reasons. So the first reason is a lot of people are very uncomfortable in confrontational situations. A lot of people have never had to deal with confrontation face to face with another person in their life before. It's very difficult psychologically for people to get over that, and sport style sparring is often perceived as a little bit safer and a little bit more secure and a little bit more formalised, so people feel more comfortable getting involved with that before we jump into the more kind of scenario based realistic stuff where someone my size is screaming obscenities in your face and trying to knock your head off. You have a bit of experience dealing with the adrenaline, dealing with someone attacking you, dealing with restrictions in vision, things like that. Increased breathing rate, increased heart rate, all of those somatic kind of reactions to stress, and the psychological reactions to stress as well that are going to be useful later. But for most people, that sport style sparring is much more accessible, it's much easier to get into, so people aren't quite as concerned, and then they can build up to the more realistic training. So the reason we do it to bear more of a resemblance to, as I say, kickboxing or MMA is because A, the intensity is there. So I've done WKF style points fighting competitions, I've done kickboxing points competitions. They are not as difficult, they are not as physically demanding as continuous full contact type, or even light continuous type sparring or competition. So if we're trying to acclimatise people to the physical stresses of physical confrontation, we need to pick a means of training that actually replicates those physical demands. So that bouncing around, I've scored a point, we're going to reset. Bouncing around, I've scored another point, we're going to reset. That's too slow speed and it's too intermittent, in my opinion, for us to develop it properly into our actual realistic training. Secondly, the reason I don't do the kind of WKF style point sparring is because I don't think the distance is suitable for what we go on to do. I think the distances used in MMA and kickboxing are much more suitable for what we do later on. And finally, obviously, the more prescriptive a rule set is, the less useful it's going to be for us as practical karateka later down the line, when you start opening up and allowing people to do things like, take each other down during, striking training, and do more all-in sparring, allow people to throw in, sweeps and trips and things, and kick to facilitate all of that kind of stuff. So even here, as we move later on, we do less and less of the kind of sport kickboxing type stuff, and what we do will bear far more of a resemblance to MMA as a sport. So this is why I don't really do what is typically understood as karate type sparring. So what else do I do as sparring? So one of the earliest things we do is to get people used to grappling. So we have 3 kind of key grappling positions that we use and that we build off of. So these are our collar and elbow hold, so back of the neck and inside the crook of the elbow, our under over, so back of the tricep and upper back, and then our double under, so both hands underneath their opponent's armpits, keeping their arms controlled. So the first thing we do, and we do this from the level of white belts, is we'll just work on transitions between those, so transitioning from that collar and elbow hold into an over under, into a double under, reset, transitions, reset, transition, reset. This is one of the earliest bits of sparring that we do, and it's just to get people used to moving in that kind of very short range, particularly people who have perhaps done karate before but have a different idea of what karate sparring is to what we have. It gets them used to working with someone in that close range. From that we'll build on, we'll do slightly more competitive, so we'll have people work for a double under or work for a standing back control, and hold that for a set period of time, and that will be competitive. So we'll start in, for example, a wrestler's hold, so a collar and elbow. They'll be given the ajime, and they'll work to that position and try and hold it, and they're trying to beat their opponent in that situation. So with our white belts, there really aren't any win conditions. We're just looking for you to complete the transitions competently. As we start to progress, we start to introduce those win conditions. I want you to fight for a double under, I want you to hold that double under. Work on keeping those elbows nice and tight, work on keeping them in, work on keeping your head into their neck. Don't give them any space to get under your hooks and work you out of there. So from there, we're going to build in, we're going to start introducing, as I've said, that kickboxing, that MMA style sport type sparring, to get people used to the adrenaline and used to people coming at them trying to hit them, which is something that most people don't have to deal with. And then as we get on from kind of about green belt on, so from about halfway through our Q grade syllabus on, we start adding in the all-in stuff. So you can do anything, you can punch, kick, depending on the padding that we have on elbows, knees, headbutts, throws, sweeps, takedowns, basically anything goes. And we'll start introducing different win conditions at that point as well. So, we might say to one person, okay, your goal is to get your opponent on the ground. The other person, your goal is to hold your opponent in back control for 10 seconds. So they will be working towards different win conditions, and that starts to simulate a little bit more the kind of realism that we want later in the syllabus, where we're actually looking at scenario training, because you've got to bear in mind that in non-consensual violence, the win condition for each party is very different. For the criminal, the win condition is to commit the crime they are attempting to commit. For you as the victim, the win condition is largely escape. That's kind of the primary win condition, is to escape safely. So what can we take from traditional karate that I do think is worth having? Not a huge amount from the kind of 3K WKF style there are things in traditional karate that we do use, and by traditional I mean going back to Kyohan traditional. So we use those EI drills, we use those in the club. They're a great bit of fun. They're a nice warm up to more modern, more realistic groundwork. They have really a lot of historical interest. There's something that's fun that we add in. We use as set drills Motobu's partner drills. So we work through all of those, and those are matched to the kata. So the ones that bear the most resemblance to the kata at that level, we use those as a piece of sparring, a set piece of sparring. But beyond that, there's not a huge amount in the modern tradition of karate that actually is of benefit to us as a practical club working to practical, more self-defense oriented desires. So where do I think that we as karateka should go? As I've said, I think we should look more towards MMA for sport style sparring. I think people in the practical sphere who ignore sport style sparring entirely are missing something. I think it does have quite a bit of benefit, but you have to choose the sport that you're mimicking the sport that you're engaging in quite well. It's something that you have to look at and think, okay, what meets our needs. But not only practically, you have to bear in mind that if you omit sport style sparring, you're going to miss out on some people who are trying to get into this for fitness and fun. And competition is a lot of fun. It's fine to be teaching people really interesting, really practical self-defense skills. But if they're there to get fitter and have fun, and they don't necessarily find that as interesting, they're going to miss out. And you can keep those people involved a little bit more through competition. So, for example, I will look out for competitions close to us that are open for like kickboxing and amateur boxing and things like that, so that people can have get in a ring and have some fun, and do a little bit of competition and feel a bit of a sense of accomplishment in that, as well as what we do in the dojo, because I think people get a lot out of that. So I think omitting sport style sparring entirely misses a trick there. So to summarise, the way I approach sparring is I largely ignore the modern tradition in karate. I get rid of all of that. We do very little of that in our club, if any at all. I look to more modern combat sports that have a more similar demand to our practical self-defense oriented demands, and I take from those what I think will be useful, but I do keep pieces of historical interest, like the EI drills, like Motobu's drills. I'm quite fond of Judo's Goshin Jutsu no Kata. We'll sometimes play around with that a little bit, not as a part of our syllabus, just because it's something that's fun and it's interesting to look at what other people do. So when it comes to sparring, the key question is, what are you sparring for? What's the purpose of it? And if you're doing sparring that isn't specifically directed at that, so for us, our focus is self-defense. If we're doing sparring that's not directly self-defense related, what are we getting out of it that will lead into that? So is it improving our fitness? Is it improving our individual technique? Is it improving our ability to handle physical and psychological reactions to stress? What are we getting out of it that benefits us? And if the answer to that is nothing, we get rid of that, we choose something different, we implement that, and we work with that. So that was just a quick discussion on how we look at sparring and how I look at sparring, what I think we can take away from the modern tradition of karate, and where outside karate I think we need to look for other methods of sparring that we can implement. Join me next Sunday where I'll be discussing a different topic. Have a lovely week. I'll see you then.